Last week, when Em was taking our session, we were looking at how the Israelites were constantly grumbling. But we also saw that it was through the Israelites' journey in the wilderness that they learnt to trust in God as their provider. God had provided them with water, with manna, and with quail, showing himself to be present with them, even in the wilderness. Today we're going to be looking at chapters 19 to 20, and we're going to be thinking about whether Christianity is really just a bunch of rules. But before we turn to our passage, we're going to hear from a few people that we know share some stories from the past about times when they've been very, very naughty.
Hi everyone, hope you're well. I'm going to tell you about a time when I was about 13 and I went to a school where every year we used to have to do a sponsored walk around Windsor Great Park. I went to a school just outside Windsor, and when you reach year 9, the length that you had to walk jumped from 7 miles to 11 miles. And I was with 2 other friends and we just thought that was a bit unfair and that was too far. So we decided we would take a shortcut. So we strayed away from the main walking route. But someone quite famous lives in Windsor Castle, a selection of fairly well-known people. So we were halfway across this bit of private land. 2 armed policemen came and escorted myself and my 2 friends off the Queen's Land, back onto the track. They walkie-talkie through to the walk marshals. This was well before mobile phones, 1987, I want to say. And they used their walkie-talkies, called the walk marshals, who called our head teacher, who was there to meet us. And we had to do the entire thing from the start all over again.
So when I was in year 7, I absolutely detested French lessons. And there was this one time when I paid a friend about, I think, 50p to do my French homework for me, meaning that I wasn't able to afford my Twiglets at break time. But his dad eventually found my exercise book in his bag and he reported me to the teachers, and so the next day I was called out of the classroom by the head of year and I got into a lot of trouble for trying to pay someone to do my French homework. Okay, so now we're moving on to our naughty quiz, where I'm going to read you something very naughty and you're going to have to try to guess which member of staff did it. So there's Tim, there's Fran, there's Janet, there's James, there's Em, and there's myself. So here is the first naughty thing. This person broke into a zoo in the Cotswold. Who is it? It's James! Okay, so if you got that right, give yourself a pat on the back. This is the second question. This person locked a teacher in a stationery cupboard. This person locked a teacher in a stationery cupboard. Who is it? And that was Fran! Yay! Okay, make sure you keep scores and see who gets the most points in your families. Question number 3. This person bought a child's bus ticket when they were over the age of 16. Who do you think that is? And that was Fran again! Woo! Okay, it seems like Fran is so far the naughtiest member of staff. And here's our final question. This person signed their own school diary for 6 months until they were caught by their mum. This person signed their own school diary for 6 months until they were caught by their mum. Who do you think it is? And that was James again. And so it seems like we can conclude that the naughtiest members of staff are James and Fran. So those were our very naughty stories. Don't copy us, don't do any of that at home or at school. or Windsor Castle. But now we're going to look at our passage. So if you've got your Bibles, do follow along. It's been 2 months since the Israelites have left Egypt. And now they've arrived to the wilderness of Sinai, which was where God actually spoke to Moses through the burning bush. And Moses goes up the mountain to speak to God. And this is what God says to Moses. He says to him, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth. For all the earth belongs to me. And you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel." And so God is saying, if you choose to obey me, you will be blessed. But if you disobey me, you will be cursed. So we can see that there is a condition here, which is for the Israelites to be obedient to God. But what we can also see is that it is God's intention to make Israel into his own special treasure, to make them into a holy nation that's set apart for him, so that he can then use Israel to reach out to the rest of the world. And as Christians, as God's people, that is actually what we are. It says in 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9, "You are a chosen people. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's very own possession. And as a result, you can show others the goodness of God. For he has called you out of the darkness and into his wonderful light." Isn't that amazing? And then as we continue on the passage, we read about the holy presence of God, and also how God commands that his presence is to be respected. If we look at verse 10, God says to Moses, "Go down and prepare the people for my arrival. Consecrate them today and tomorrow, and have them wash their clothing. Be sure they are ready on the third day. For on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch." So God says that he is going to appear to Israel in a special way. But before that, they need to prepare themselves. They need to get ready. It's kind of similar to what people do when they prepare to meet the Queen. They need to get ready because she's a really important person. But then listen to what God says next. He says, "Mark off a boundary all around the mountain. Mark off a boundary all around the mountain. Warn the people, be careful. Do not go up on the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the mountain will certainly be put to death. No hand may touch the person or animal that crosses the boundary. Instead, stone them or shoot them with arrows. They must be put to death. However, when the ram's horn sounds a long blast, then the people may go up on the mountain." Then the passage continues saying, "On the morning of the third day, thunder roared and lightning flashed, and a dense cloud came down on the mountain. There was a long, loud blast from a ram's horn, and all the people trembled. They were terrified. They were afraid. Moses led them out from the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. All of Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in the form of fire. The smoke billowed into the sky like smoke from a brick kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the ram's horn grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God thundered his reply. the Lord came down on the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses climbed the mountain. Then the Lord told Moses, "Go back down and warn the people not to break through the boundaries to see the Lord, or they will die." And so what we see here is that God is holy and set apart. In the Old Testament, there were certain things that people had to do in order to enter the presence of God. And this was really serious, because if they failed to prepare properly, or if they stepped past the boundary that they're not supposed to cross, they would actually die. One way that I've heard it being put is that the holiness of God is like the sun, because if you get too close to the sun, you burn up, you die. And in the same way, in the Old Testament, when imperfect and sinful people approach a holy and perfect God, they would die. But what we can learn from this chapter is that even though God is holy, even though God is set apart, he still longs to be with his people. He doesn't want to be a distant God who's far away, but he longs to be with his people. He wants to be with Israel, which is why he gives the Israelites the instructions to consecrate themselves and to prepare themselves, because that's something that they need to do in order to actually approach God. It's all about what they need to do to be set apart for God. We're actually going to be exploring this in more depth over the next few weeks as we look at the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. But one thing that we need to bear in mind and remember as we look at these sort of passages is that because of what Jesus has done, that boundary that separates us from God has actually been torn. You know, when Jesus died on the cross, you might remember that the temple curtains, they tear from top to bottom. And because of that, it means that for those of us who are Christians, for those of us who are in Christ, we are able to approach God's throne of grace with confidence. It's no longer about what we have to do. It's no longer about what we need to do, but it's about what has been done already for us on the cross. And it's not about religion, but it's about relationship. If we turn to chapter 20, we'll find the 10 Commandments. And if you look at them closely, you'll notice that the first 4 commandments are all about our relationship with God, whereas the other 6 are all about our relationship with one another. But all these commandments are given by a holy God to help guide people to live in a holy way. The question I want to ask you, though, is this: what do you honestly think about the commandments? Or even, what do you think about rules? I once heard it being said by someone that all I've ever learnt at school was how to bend and break the rules. Or how about this? You've probably heard of this one. Rules are made to be broken. Some people might actually say it's even fun to break the rules. And they may even get a kick out of seeing what it is that they're able to get away with. For many people growing up, they want to discover who they are. They want to be their own person. And what they tend to do is they often try to express their growing sense of independence by pushing the boundaries and by breaking the rules. They don't want to be held back, but they want to do whatever they want whenever they want. And if you think about it, many people think about faith in this way. They believe Christianity to simply be a bunch of rules that are there to ruin their fun and to restrict their freedom. They think of God as this killjoy who's just there to get in the way. However, once we understand that God is perfect, we also realize that the law is good. And once we understand why God has given his law to us, we also realize that God's rules don't actually ruin our fun, but they help us to live more fully. For example, if you are playing a game of football, there has to be rules and there has to be boundaries. Otherwise, it's just going to be complete chaos. And so in that respect, rules are actually helpful because they enable the game to be played. Now, if you think about it like that, then God's commandments are actually helpful. They are actually a gift to us. They don't restrict our freedom, but they guide us to live well.
Rabbi Zacharias says this: "True freedom is not the liberty to do whatever we want. It is the strength to do what we should."
If you were to think about this in the context of the Exodus, the Israelites were not free to worship God when they were slaves in Egypt. But after they had been rescued, they were free to worship God. And if you were to think about this in our own context, before we put our faith in Jesus, we were slaves to sin and unable to do what was right. But once we have been rescued by Jesus and set free, we are then able to start living the more abundant life that He's come to give us. So as we wrap up, what are some of the things we can take away from these 2 chapters? I think the first thing is that we can remember that God is holy and set apart. And because of that, we should honour Him. We should respect Him. But the amazing thing is that even though God is holy, He still longs to be present with His people. He longs to be close to us. And the second thing is that the commandments that God gives to us aren't there to restrict our freedom, but they are there to enable us to live well. Guys, as always, it's great to be with you all, whether it's in person or online. Hope to see some of you on Wednesday as we finish our Alpha course. That's going to be really exciting, so do join in for that. But now we're going to join in with the rest of our church family to celebrate Remembrance Day, so do click on the video below. But I'll see you very soon. We're praying for you. God bless and take care.